Since 1948, the entire railway network in the DPRK has been under the control of the Korean State Railway. The organisation serves as the operating arm for the Ministry of Railways, which is the government body responsible for overseeing general operations. Although the network is governed as one today, that's a relatively modern development. Most of the early construction took place prior to the Second World War, during the period of Japanese occupation, which brought a marked increase in infrastructure projects across Korea. In this video, we'll be looking at the network which forms the modern Korean State Railway, initially focusing on the lines built north of the 38th parallel when Korea was still unified. Although we won't really be able to delve into minute details in this video, it should give you an idea of how the railway grew over the last century into today's 4,700 kilometre network. The first major line to run through the northern half of Korea was the Gyeonggi Line, opened in 1906, running from Gyeongsong, modern-day Seoul, through Pyongyang and into Sinuiju on the northern border with China. In 1910, a new line connecting Pyongyang with the port city of Nampo opened. This Pyeongnam Line is the oldest line on the network to still maintain its original name. From this point until 1945, Korea was under Japanese occupation. The Japanese invested heavily in infrastructure throughout the country, and this caused a marked increase in the number of railway lines being constructed. In 1911, a small line opened between Pyongyang and Sadong, the Pyongyang Colliery Line. 3 years later, a major line was completed linking Gyeongsong with the port city of Wonsan on the east coast, named the Gyeongwon Line. Similar to the Pyeongnam Line, we can see clearly here how the railway line naming system often worked in Korea. Each name takes the first syllable from each terminus to form a portmanteau. In 1915, the Gyeongmi-po Line linked the industrial city of Songnim on the Taedong River to the Gyeongsong Line, connecting at Hwangju. 2 years later, the longest line built to date was completed. The Hamgyong Line ran the entire length of Hamgyong Province, connecting the city of Wonsan with the city of Hweryong on the northern border with China. This line also ran through the major industrial port city of Chongjin, referred to today as the City of Iron, and Hamhung, today the DPRK's second city. Throughout the 1920s, the Japanese Empire went into overdrive, constructing 5 new major lines in northern Korea. The West Tomun Line linked Hweryong with Kangali in the far north. The Hamnam Line ran north from the city of Hamhung into the Pujeon Highlands as far as Shinhung. The Hambuk Line was opened, connecting Musan with Komusan. And the Tonghae-Pukpu Line, which ran from Yangyang, now part of South Korea, through the Kumgangsan region to terminate at Anbyeon. In 1932, the Suncheon-Cheondong Line opened, connecting Suncheon and Cheondong. The Hanam Line reached Pujeon-Hoban that same year and was renamed the Shinhung Line. In 1933, the management of the northern section of the Hamgyong Line, still the longest railway line at this point, was transferred between companies. The new North Chosen Line now ran between Sambong and Sonbong, known at the time as Sansambong and Eungi. The section of rail running between Hweryong and Sambong was incorporated into the Hamgyong Line. One of the stops on the new line, Namyang, now serves as a border crossing into China over the Tumen River. Cross-border development between Korea and China was extensive, thanks mostly to Japan's occupation of northern China in 1932 and the creation of the Manchukuo puppet state. Most of the bridges which crossed the Amnok and Tumen rivers between the DPRK and China, even to this day, were constructed by the Japanese during the 1930s. Elsewhere in 1933, the Suncheon-Cheondong Line was renamed the Manpo Line and had been extended as far as Kujang. By 1935, a new line had been completed connecting Yonggwang with Sasu. This would be named the Changjin Line due to its proximity to Lake Changjin, known at the time as Chosin Reservoir. This area would become the site of one of the most infamous battles of the Korean War. In 1937, a link between Kilju and Hyesan had been completed and named the Kil-hye Line. In 1938, the Manpo Line finally reached Manpo, having reached the city of Kangye a year prior. Over the next 2 years leading up to the Second World War, the Pyeongbuk Line from Cheongju to Cheongsu opened, along with the new Oncheon Line, which ran between Nampo and Pyeongnam-Oncheon. During the Second World War, Japan managed to complete another 3 major lines in northern Korea. The Pyeongwon Line between Pyongyang and Kowon, the Pengmu Line between Musan and Pengam-Cheongneon, and the Soson line between Kangdong and Sunghori. The Hanbuk line between Musan and Komusan was renamed the Musan line before the end of the war. With the surrender of Japan in 1945, Korea and its railway network underwent a major restructuring. Perhaps the most significant change was the total division of the country, which severed lines linking the north and the south. Between 1945 and 1948, a series of major changes took place on the network. The Gyeongsong line was divided into two new lines. The Pyeonggi line ran between the new capital, Pyongyang, and Sinuiju, while the Pyeongbu line ran south from Pyongyang to the new de facto border. Since the physical line extended into the south to the city of Busan, it was given the name Pyeongbu. Today, this line's de facto terminus is Kaesong City. The Tonghae-Pukpu line was cut along the 38th parallel and was renamed the Kumgangsan-Cheongnyun line, now terminating at Kamho. The original Gyeongwon line was renamed the Kangwon line, after the name of the province, and now terminated at Pyongyang. Other minor changes included a renaming of the old Kyomi-po line to the Songnim line, the combining of the Pyeongnam and Oncheon lines into one continuous Pyeongnam line, and finally the various northeastern lines were amalgamated into one, forming the modern Hanbuk line between Cheongjin and Najin via Hwaryong. By 1948, the entire network north of the 38th parallel was under the control of the Korean State Railway. It's worth noting at this point that the Korean War between 1950 and 1953 saw significant damage done to the network. As part of Kim Il-sung's Cholima movement in the aftermath of the conflict, special attention was given to rejuvenating the railway network as part of the national effort to rebuild infrastructure with the help of many Cold War allies. During the course of the Korean War, very little development was done on the railway network, with the exception of the Honggi line, which was built in 1952 between Honggi and Kasan in the Soviet Union. This route over the Tumen River remains the only direct transport link between the DPRK and Russia today. After the armistice agreement was signed in 1953, development reignited with two new lines, the Pyeongdok line, which ran between the capital Pyongyang and Kujang Station, and the new Parwon-Cheongnyeon line, connecting Parwon with Kujang. By 1958, the Hwanghae line was completed, connecting the capitals of North and South Hwanghae Province, Sarewon and Haeju. This was the first major railway line in South Hwanghae, a rural region largely neglected by the Japanese due to its lack of industrial capacity. However, in the new independent DPRK, agricultural capacity was paramount, and so including this region into the railway network was an important goal. 1959 saw the opening of the Unbong line between Manpo and Unbong. This line ran along the Amnok River Valley along the Chinese border. By 1965, the direct link between Cheongjin and Najin had been completed, running along the northeast coast of the country, named the Cheongna line. In 1971, the Eunyeol line was built between Sarewon and Cheolgwang on the banks of the Taedong River, further integrating South Hwanghae into the network. And the following year, the Cheongnyun-Icheon line was completed, running parallel to the DMZ and connecting the Kangwon and Pyeongbu lines. By 1976, the Parwon-Cheongnyeon line now ran between Kujang and Kusong, linking the Manpo line with the Pyeongbuk line. Most of the country was now linked into the national railway network, and a lot of attention was now given to electrifying and modernising these lines. However, in 1986, a new project was completed near Nampo at the mouth of the Taedong River, the West Sea Barrage. This new barrage served not only as a dam, but as a railway bridge. The Sohae-Kamun line opened between Cheolgwang and Seolyongni near Nampo, crossing the Taedong River mouth over the barrage. In 1988, the Unbong line was extended and renamed, becoming the Pukpu line between Hyesan and Manpo. In 1993, the Pyeongna line was officially opened. This new line was to run from Pyongyang to Najin, the longest line on the network. The Hamgyong line was first divided, with the Kowon-Wonsan stretch incorporated into the Kangwon line. The new Pyeongna line combined the Pyeongwon, Hamgyong and Cheongna lines, running across the country and up the northeast coast to Najin. In the aftermath of this development, the network was more or less complete. The only significant development was the extension of the Kumgangsan-Cheongnyeon line, which began running to Jeojin in South Korea in 2007 as part of the Kumgangsan Joint Tourism Project, although this service was terminated only a few years later along with the project.